End Time Talk Radio, where the truth is usually stranger than fiction. The purpose of these shows are not to scare you, but to prepare you, because what you don't know could hurt you. The word says in Hosea 4:6, "My people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge." Thank you for joining us. My name is Julie, and here is the host of the show, Barry Meyer.
Today in End Time Talk Radio, we have Brad Herrington and Barbie Herrington, and they actually had a local newspaper here in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and also did some local radio. And they're going to be talking about quite a few things that are happening here in Cheyenne, Wyoming, but also it'll affect you where you're at here in the United States, and also probably where you live in the world too. But we're just asking that you listen to their hearts tonight, and well, we'll be right back with Brad and Barbie Herrington.
I took journalism in college, and I was the editor-in-chief of my college paper back in the mid-'80s, Saddleback College in Mission Viejo, California. Yes, I did escape from the People's Republic of California. I wasn't born here in Wyoming yet, but I got here as fast as I could.
Yeah.
And I wrote commentaries for the Orange County Register for a number of years, and finally, but I never pursued journalism as a career because even back then, my evaluation of most of the standards of journalism was pretty poor.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no interest in shoving a microphone in front of somebody's face and asking them how they felt after their house had just burned down. And so I stuck to political and economic commentary. And when I moved out of California in the late 90s, I quit writing. And I started back up again in 2008 when I realized that Barack Obama was going to be elected the president. And I started writing national level commentaries. Reed printed a couple of them because he still had his editor for the opinion page then, Scott Smith, who's now the information officer for the city, but then stopped because he didn't want to run national level stuff. He badgered me a couple times about running local stuff, and I wasn't interested. And finally, I decided to do it. He asked me a third time, and so I started writing on local issues. My wife and I started attending the city council meetings to become informed about the local issues. And what we found was, well, Barb, how would you characterize it?
Well, that would be kind of a hard one, Brad, because for me, I found a lack of accountability more than anything, a lack of accountability, a lack of integrity, and more than anything, they really didn't want us there, but they don't want you there either. It's not us in particular. It's not user-friendly, put it that way.
That's too bad.
What I would say is that what we found in the local machinations of political ingenuity here in Cheyenne was a mirror of what you can see on the national level. Not quite as bankrupt, not quite as decadent, but the seeds of both come from the same source. So I began writing for the WTE, and I was writing a column every week, and I write from a pro-capitalist libertarian-ish, if you want to call it that, founding fathers, classical liberalism point of view. I think the government ought to be the army, the police, and the courts, and that's about it. All other things ought to be left up to private individuals to develop and see as they see fit. As long as they're peacefully using their own property, they ought to be allowed to do so without some bureaucrat having to be the one that gives them permission. The genius of the founding fathers was that they declared that our rights were ours by right, not by permission, and that it was society that was a means to the end of the individual instead of the individual being a means to the society around them, which is the way it is in all collectivistic systems like not capitalism, but communism, socialism, fascism, Nazism. All those systems are based on the idea that the individual is nothing and the state is everything, and I think exactly the opposite, just like Thomas Jefferson, just like Thomas Paine, just like James Madison, and all the rest of our founding fathers. But anyway, that was the perspective I wrote from, and that's how I analyzed city and county and state events, and I was a decided contrast to what you found on those pages most of the time. And I did that for a year and a half, and what got the torch going was Barbie and I decided that the city really needed a newspaper that had an alternative to offer people to the left wing power and control, advocacies of the WTE editorially and to the slanted news that they ran on the news page. Not just slanted in terms of how it was written, but slanted in terms of how it appeared, what was covered, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Barbie had always wanted to do, we ended up calling it Barbie's Blotters, a positive part of the community instead of just, and we picked the Blotters because, that name anyway, because, everybody reads the Blotters. They want to find out who got thrown in jail for whatever.
Yeah.
And Barbie's thought was, let's put out things positive, like the good stuff people did. And it ended up being the most popular part of the newspaper. So that was what got us started. We got to thinking, let's just start our own paper. So we did. So our first issue hit the streets on September the 2nd, 2010. And, that would be 2011. I'm sorry.
Okay.
We worked on it all over the summer. I quit writing for the WTE in May, and we came out once a month for 15 months. And we went from 8 pages to, I think, 24 pages was our biggest issue. And we had 5,000 papers that we distributed around town, and by the end of our run, we were in several cities outside of Cheyenne. We were in Casper. We were in not Rock Springs. What's the other city? Saratoga, Riverside, and of course, we did everything in Laramie County. And there were a lot of reasons why we decided to stop it, but that was what got us going, and that was what made us start the paper. Was we really felt the city of Cheyenne deserved to hear a rational alternative to the collectivistic trash that was being offered up in the media here locally, quite frankly.
Well, with the Wyoming Tribune Eagle here in Cheyenne, it's really hard to actually even go through the paper. About the only thing that's really kind of good for is actually the grocery store ads, on Wednesday when they come out. The sad thing is, when things are, how many times have I listened to local radio station, KGAB 650 here in Cheyenne, where people call up and they'll say they never even did my column in there. They'll just talk about something, and I don't remember what. I don't read the paper enough to even say, hey, I know what this is or that. But people write it like a little thing that they believe or think. And, the funny thing is they'll always push those liberal agendas in there all the time.
Well, and I think that's there's two things going on in the background there, Barry, I believe. One is that is the general intellectual trend, and I use that word loosely, of not only the city and the county and the state, but our entire country, in fact, our entire world. That is the general intellectual trend. And also, the editor, the executive editor of the WTE, Reed Eckhart, bless his heart, is just as left-wing. And the thing that really annoyed me about all that was it was always done in the name of progress and growth, and, we're pro-growth. And see, in my mind, and I wrote a piece on it called Back to the Basics, where I discussed where economy, state, government actually originated from originally. And it was back in the when we started agriculture, we were now locked into living on a certain piece of land permanently as opposed to hunting and gathering, and that was where property began to be developed and the need for property protection, and that was what how government evolved. And the whole thing about growth is when the individual members of a society grow, that's growth, and then that turns into social growth, if you want to call it that, because that's really a no concept, if you follow me. But this idea that you can grow a city or an economy by taking from some people through force and giving it to other people that you deem worthy of receiving that money, well, actually, and technically, for students of comparative political systems, that's the definition of fascism. Socialism will take your property outright. Fascism will leave you the deed but control the results anyway and pick the winners and losers in the so-called marketplace. And all this is being advocated in the name of growth and progress, and it's actually the antithesis of growth and progress. It's the destruction of growth and progress. And so, my one small voice, if you want to call it that, while I was on the WTE, counteracted that. I actually did develop a pretty good following. A lot of people started reading the paper because they knew my column was in there. And so, I don't regret writing for the WTE. Reed was good to me. We've had our differences of opinion like you wouldn't believe, but he never touched a word of what I wrote, and he ran my column every week, regardless of what my topic was, as long as it was something to do with Wyoming or Cheyenne or Laramie County. He let it run, and I got to give the man credit for that.
Well, that's good. Hey, do you have any radio prospects in the future? Is there anything out there? I just got to throw that out there.
Well, Barbie and I actually did a radio show for about 3 months here over the summer and fall. It was called Liberty's Voice, and it was basically on the radio medium what our paper was in journalism, the newsprint. And what ended up happening was Larry Proietti bought up K-Ray, which was 1480 K-Ray AM, and it's still there. And he wanted to do an oldies format, but he also wanted to have some talk shows in the morning. So he picked Barbie and I to do a 9 to 10 a.m. slot Monday through Friday, and we called it Liberty's Voice. And we talked about just the kind of stuff that we talked about in our newspaper. We brought the issues of the day that were being discussed, like whether it be the eminent domain seizure of the Hollywood video property for the Pershing Roundabout, or whether it was the city council trying to tell everybody what to do with their own private property through the Unified Development Code. We brought all those ideas and issues to bear. And, you know, Barbie and I have a little bit different viewpoints, not so much that we believe different things, but we think different. I tend to be a more intellectual and much more political, economic, philosophically oriented. Barb tends to be more down to earth, and you know what's the mom going to say about this? You know, so
sure.
we bounced off of one another pretty good, and we didn't quit because we didn't like it. We had issues with the management of the station. That's what got us off the air, and we just up and quit one day. So we ran for about 3 months, and we enjoyed it greatly. You know, and there's a part of me that would love to do that again. How about you, Barb?
Yeah, that is one thing that I would do again. It was fun listening to the people, and it was more of an intellectual conversation than what you could get if you were trying to talk to city council.
Sure.
The questions that people would bring about it, you engaged into a conversation that was interesting for all that was listening. And you can't do that at council because you're not allowed to ask questions. You can make comments.
Mm-hmm.
And quite frankly, and I came out of retirement long enough to pound the Planning Commission's ears last week about their Unified Development Code review, and I also pounded the City Council's ears Monday night about what I thought about that Planning Commission review. And I told them flat out, people aren't interested in public input. What you're interested in is the appearance of public input. And there's a big difference. With public input, you're actually seeking the honest opinions of the people that you serve. And with the appearance of public input, you're just looking to rubber stamp your political BS while you're making people think that you're doing it through their public input. That's completely different. It's absolutely dishonest.
You know, I don't really normally have a lot of people that are locally here, and that's what's really good about having you guys on, is that people that would normally listen to me are more of a nationwide and even worldwide. People need to realize what's going on, even in Cheyenne, Wyoming. They need to realize what's going on in their community, and I think having you on tonight will get people more active, because I joined. Well, I'm gonna actually be with you guys here when seeing UDC, which is Agenda 21 here, and going through Cheyenne. They're trying to renew it, and you know, most people don't realize what's kind of going on there, and even in their own towns. And when I kind of heard what you guys are doing, and I'm getting more ideas of how to kind of go about, I can actually understand what's kind of going on in our community. And I think that's what people need to realize. Even in their own towns in the USA are happening like this too.
Well, I think one thing that people really need to realize is it's about the planners. If you're going to talk about Cheyenne, when we went to that meeting and listened to the planners, they picked and choose what kind of material that they even put forth to the council, in which the mayor had what's it called?
The Planning Commission members, there's 7 of them.
They
all these ideas for the yearly review of the Unified Development Code, or the UDC, were submitted to the planners, and they picked and chose what they decided to give that Planning Commission for review. An architect here who actually designed our county courthouse right down at 20th and Cary or wherever it's at. And has done quite a number of buildings, very good buildings. Noel Griffith here in Cheyenne wanted Section 6.6 and 6.7, the design standards, absolutely wiped out because he said it destroys the individuality of the architect and his ability to create art, which in essence, architecture is a form of art. And he submitted dozens, I think it was over 60 photos of various buildings he had built in other places that he could not build here in Cheyenne because of the planning codes. And the planning department decided that they didn't want to give those pictures and his review to the commission. So when he got up to speak about him and it was referencing his material, the planning commission is looking at him like he's from Mars because they never saw it, because some planner decided, and it was Brandon Camerata, decided that they didn't need to see that. And so therefore, when all these reviews are in the process now of going before the city council for their final decision, they're not going to see that material either. And that was one of the things Barb pounded him about Monday night. The thing that I pounded him about was their so-called public input. We sat there for 6.5 hours before we could argue about whether or not there ought to even be a UDC.
And I sat there for 2 hours myself, actually, in the audience, and there was I think the agenda was saying up to U. I left on C, and when I listened to KGAB, they said it went until like 12:30 in the morning before you guys even got
it. Yeah, at 12:30. And, I think the most interesting thing that anybody could have taken away from that is you have a body in which is going to counsel our city counselors in whether this is a good thing or a bad thing and what public input is and what it isn't. There is none of that. It's not about just there's no public input. The input that they get is strictly from the planners. When you look at the fact that they put the man on the agenda. Noel Griffith was actually on the agenda, and he submitted all kinds of material. And when he stands up there and speaks and says, well, I thought maybe I would hear something back from some of you, and he got nothing in return. And then they said, well, we never got anything. It told me all that I needed to know, and if it wasn't that I wanted to see the outcome, it was time to go. Because the city planners, having that kind of control, they're going to feed them whatever they want. It's not just public input, the things that they put on the agenda. They didn't provide that material when it was given to them so that other people could make a choice. Brandon made the choices for himself, so I'm not sure why anybody's trying to get involved in it, because it's between Brandon. That's it.
And quite frankly, Barry, I let the council have that verbally Monday night, and I told them this whole idea of your public input's an absolute farce.
Yep.
25 people showed up to give you public input, and 3/4 of them left by the time their permission was granted for that public input. So, how interested are you in public input as opposed to just the appearance of it? And the open house they had back in November was the same thing when they were announcing that the UDC was going to be coming up for its yearly review in a few months. They sectioned off everybody that came in. They had a planner in each corner and a planner in the middle, 5 different sections, and they just took the people that came in and tried to diffuse everything. There was never an organized presentation given by the planning department. There was never an organized presentation being permitted by the people that showed up to give their feedback to an organization or a body. It was all sectioned off and bled out of existence, essentially. But see, now, 3 or 4 months later, the planning department can say, well, we had public input. We had an open house on the 16th of November, and we had this and that. And the reality is, public input, my butt. The whole thing was a farce.
Now, some people may not know what UDC and Agenda 21 is. Can you give a brief description of that?
Yeah, I sure can, and I was just going to get along to that because, see, these kind of techniques, these kind of bleeding the opposition out of existence, of the appearance of public input when it's really not public input at all, these are all part and parcel of the overall scheme, the overall mechanisms that these kind of people employ to further their agenda. And essentially, the Unified Development Code, which is what the UDC is the byproduct of Agenda 21, and I've proved it many times. Let me give you the rundown, and it's going to take, a few minutes.
Sure.
But I can tell you what essentially happened, okay?
Okay.
Well, first off, there was Agenda 21. That was written up and presented to the United Nations Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro back in 1992, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And that itself was the byproduct of several United Nations conferences that dated back even to the World Hunger Conference in 1976, which is the first time that the idea of sustainable development was even mentioned. And sustainable development is this idea that what we are doing to the earth environmentally and through the social system of capitalism is ultimately destructive and it's going to short circuit, and therefore we have to come up with these alternative ideas of environmentalism and economics and equity. Those are the 3 E's straight out of Agenda 21 to further the planet and the progress of mankind. And it's all false. It's all based on an incorrect political and economic philosophy. It's Marxist to the core. It's collectivistic through and through. And it actually stems right out of the very United Nations Charter itself, which back in 1945 was set up to prevent the world from ending up in more world wars. Now, if you were interested in preventing the world from ending up in a world war, would you put the 2 bloodiest and most brutal dictatorships in man's history on your Security Council?
No.
That would be like establishing a crime-fighting committee for your community and putting the leading gangsters on the board of directors. I mean, what would you expect from that? What you would expect is what we've had, the delivery through the United Nations of more and more power into the hands of communistic and collectivistic regimes than they could ever have earned on their own merits or through military force. And Agenda 21 essentially is the soft side of that intellectual revolution, and again, I use that word loosely. Mm-hmm. Agenda 21 is actually a blueprint for total and complete collectivization of all the property on the entire planet. And we're told that we have to do it or we're going to destroy the planet. It's inextricably interwoven with the fallacies of environmentalism and the idea that capitalism is not about progress and human prosperity, but about inequity and essentially, and there's several sections of Agenda 21 that explicitly declare that it's going to be the job of the developing nations to pay for all this. Mm-hmm. Well, what you see is, if you look at the welfare on the national level, where some people are taxed to death to pay for the people that don't produce anything but somehow think they've got a right to the product of the efforts of others to be achieved at the point of a gun, what you see on the international level with Agenda 21 is the same kind of international welfare. So what we're going to do as tax-paying citizens here in America is we're no longer going to be concerned with our own economic progress. Now our money is going to be taken from us to fund the proliferation of cannibalism in Africa and socialism in Western and Eastern Europe and all this collectivistic ideas that are being propagated throughout the world. And it came here through 2 methods, all right? One of them was the national level. President Clinton actually established the Presidential Council on Sustainable Development, the PCSD, back in 1993, and that was the top-down approach. This was it was actually explicitly declared that the purpose of the PCSD was to implement Agenda 21 on the national level of the United States of America. And what they did, basically, was they took over the federal bureaucracies and all the grants that were being issued by people like the Department of Transportation, the Housing and Urban Development, especially the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. All these grants are now going to be given out on the basis of what is economically sustainable and what's going to promote economic and sustainable development according to the dictates of Agenda 21. This was explicitly stated. The PCSD has been closed down for a number of years, but their website's still up. You can actually go out there and see who the members of these committees were and what they were advocating. It is straight out of Agenda 21, and it's not covert. It's explicitly declared. So that from the top down started, and then on the local level, what you had was ICLEI, which is the International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives, and that was actually a UN organization formed in 1990 at the World Congress in New York, and it's explicitly mentioned in Agenda 21, and I don't have the exact part of Agenda 21 with me. I believe it's Chapter 7, where when they talk about how they're going to get this agenda implemented throughout the world, that one of the techniques that they're going to employ is that they're going to get local governments to do it from the bottom up. All right? Mm-hmm. And ever since then, ICLAI they've taken over the American Planning Association, essentially. All the new international codes for electric and plumbing and fire are now coming from an organization, the International Council on, please forgive me, some of these acronyms just escape me. But anyway, the source of all those codes, they're actually explicitly partnered up with ICLAI, and the explicit declaration of that collusion is to get these international Agenda 21 codes implemented throughout the country. And so what you've had happen in the last 20 years since Agenda 21 was explicitly promulgated at the Earth Summit is a top-down approach whereby all the grants and everything and all the rules and regulations are coming from the national level on down. And then you've got ICLAI, and there's well over 1,000 cities and municipalities and counties that are actual explicit members of ICLAI. You can go out to their website and go to the membership and scroll down the list. You would not believe how many people are on that list. And they are attacking things from the bottom up. So what has happened over the last 2 decades is this top-down and bottom-up approach is absolutely and completely and almost totally permeated the entire planning sections of the United States of America. All the MPOs, the Metropolitan Planning Organizations, they're all full of Now, here's the other thing, Barry.
Okay.
Most of these people don't know what they're doing. They don't realize they're implementing Agenda 21.
And that's with the Planning Council. They don't realize that, do they?
I think some of them do, and I think at least one of them here in Cheyenne knows it very well. But by and large, what you see happening throughout the country is a lot of these things are being implemented because they're the intellectual trends, and everybody wants to be pro-growth and pro-progress, and they don't realize where this stuff is coming from. Now, to talk about here in Cheyenne, okay, in 2005, Plan Cheyenne was developed by the Metropolitan Planning Organization of Cheyenne. Now, I don't know what you know about MPOs, but MPOs are actually funded in large part by about 90% by the federal government.
Okay.
However, they're left up to the auspices of the local municipality, and they do get some funding from the county and from the city, but they're essentially a federal organization. The MPO actually took a smart growth development grant of several $1 million from the EPA, and the people on the MPO sat down with the EPA, and they developed Plan Cheyenne, which is Agenda 21 on our local level, okay? And I've demonstrated through the radio show, through newspaper articles in the Torch, the connections between Plan Cheyenne and Agenda 21, all right? If you actually look at the references that are listed in the Plan Cheyenne document, you can go to plancheyenne.org and download those and read them for yourself. The city that they used as their main guide was Mountain View, California, which is an explicit member of ICLAI, and is probably the most radically environmental left-wing city in the country they actually have an environmental planning council. So if you think our planning commission is bad, go to Mountain View, California, where they actually have an environmental planning council and commission, and their ideas and implementations were used as the source for Plan Cheyenne. And all the documents that are referenced in Plan Cheyenne either come from the American Planning Association, which is an ICLAI organization, or from other organizations like the International Council on Codes, the ICC. All these can be explicitly shown to be connected directly through one level or another to Agenda 21, either to ICLAI from the bottom up or from the various departments of the federal government from the PCSD on down. And if you look at the front cover of the Unified Development Code, it says right on it, it is the implementation of Plan Cheyenne. So if Plan Cheyenne is Agenda 21, then the Unified Development Code is Agenda 21.
You know, that's really scary because most people here in Cheyenne do not realize what's going on, because you can live in the county and it's going to affect you too, because the city now, I believe, is taking over even the building codes here too, haven't they?
Yes, they have. And one of the things that we did while we had the torch was and it wasn't too hard to find the stories. It was hard to get people to step forward and give you their names. But one of the things that we felt that was of interest to the public was publishing news stories on just how heavy-handed some of those planners and building codes and all the rest of it could be. we interviewed one property owner that had a kids center on 19th and Hugar, just to the east of downtown, and because he added some service to his educational program for kiddies, he got a certificate of occupancy re-triggered, which re-triggered redevelopment, which meant that him and his landlord had to spend over $120,000 to put ADA compliant mats on his corner of the street. Now the city did the other three corners, and they didn't do any of it. He had to make all of his sidewalks 5 feet wide instead of 3.5 feet wide. He had to tear down all the foliage behind his parking lot so he could add another 6 inches to make it compliant with the 20-07 traffic regulations that the city of Cheyenne had implemented at that time. Wow. And I mean, he had 4 employees that were out of work for a year. Now, nobody could tell me that somehow, some way, that didn't cost somebody some money. Not just the money that those 2 individuals had to spend to meet those kind of stupid, stifling requirements and regulations, but how about the 4 people that didn't have a job for a year, all right? How about, the fact that all those people that were using that business, that money was no longer in the economy, velocitizing its way throughout the local economy. Another example, another interview we did with a contractor, and he stated flat out he had to hire a $75,000 a year planner just to be able to get his projects to go through the city in an expeditious fashion. It was the only way that he could figure out how. He figured if he had a planner himself, that they could all talk planning talk, and maybe this stuff would work, and it did. But how do you think he paid for that planner? I guarantee you he jacked up his prices, and so who pays for that? So you want to hear about all these, the savings that the UDC gives people. No, they're not giving anybody savings. Mm-hmm. One of my customers, I do computers here in Cheyenne, one of my customers, Jones, Lube and More, which is the old Whitcomb's oil change on East Lincoln Way.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, that big red sign he's got out in front?
Mm-hmm.
That's been there for 30 years. The city told him 3 months ago when he was negotiating to buy that property that if he didn't take that sign down and move it away from the curb, that they would throw him in jail.
Really?
And what he basically told them was, you know what, you come on down and throw me in jail. And they finally backed down and told him, well, you could keep it there, okay? But this is the kind of heavy-handed nonsense that these people are getting away with, and it's all done in the name of progress and growth. And does anybody wonder why our economy's in the toilet? Who wants to produce under these conditions?
And it's getting worse all the time.
Yes, it is, and it's going to continue to get worse because the ideas that this is all based on are not being challenged, and that's the root of the problem. And the ideas of environmentalism and that trees matter more than people and that you don't have a right to your private property as long as you're engaging in peaceful use and disposal, those ideas are not being challenged that are contrary to that, and the good ideas are not being promoted properly or consistently. Look at what the Republicans are doing on a national level, Barry. They are absolutely gutless.
I know.
And so, like the Soviet Union used to say when it was still around on their foreign policy, when they encountered mush, they continued. When they encountered steel, they withdrew. And the Democrats and the liberals and the left-wingers are doing the exact same thing. They have taken over the entire country. They've taken over the political system. They've taken over the educational system. They've taken over the economy. And so now we're $16 trillion in debt, going up by a few $1 million every second. And our educational system is an absolute disaster. We're producing nothing but brain-dead morons and who have no idea of our history, our philosophy, our culture, any of it. And right now, because the sequester cuts, which aren't really cuts at all, let's talk about that for a minute.
Sure.
A cut is when you spend less one year than you did the year before. These aren't cuts. They're actually $15 billion more of spending than what happened the prior year. It's a cut in what was estimated to be spent more, and yet our president is going around telling everybody that we're going to have longer TSA lines, that people are going to be laid off from work, that we're going to have to let illegal aliens out of jail because we're spending $15 billion more.
Mm-hmm.
Hello? And see, if there was a Republican out there who had a backbone and any intellectual understanding of how it is that the left-wingers that managed to take over the economy, they'd be standing up talking about the true answers. But instead what they want to do is they want everybody to like them because, because nobody that's black or Mexican wants to vote for him, so they think that the answer is to hand out more free lunches. Well, with friends like that, who needs enemies?
Yeah, exactly.
We need to stand up and advocate the founding principles of the United States of America. We need to reassert our individual right to keep and maintain our own property, and the government's to serve it, not the master, and that we're entitled to keep our money and do what we want with it. And if nobody likes it, too bad. Go live somewhere else. You know, it's like what I told the city council Monday night. You know, if you want to make this place look like Fort Collins, why don't you just move to Fort Collins?
Yeah.
And I would say the same thing to the socialists and the left-wingers and the pinkos and everything else on the national level. If you think that the Soviet Union ideas were so good, go live in North Korea. Leave the rest of us alone to be free.
Well, that's very true.
That's not what they want to do. They want control.
Okay, so let's say things keep going like they are. What do you see for Cheyenne, Wyoming, and the United States here, let's say 10 years?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think on a national level things can keep going
sure.
as much longer. In fact, I believe that our economy is going to crash probably around the fall of 2014.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot engage in the kind of lunacy that we've been engaging in for decades and get away with it forever. Because the government has the ability to change the rules in the middle of the game, they can forestall things, but they can't drop interest rates any lower to keep the economy going because they're already in the toilet right now. I mean, you could buy a house now at 3.5% interest. When was the last time you could do that? In the 50s?
Yeah.
And the Federal Reserve is pumping $80 billion a month into the economy with quantitative easing number 3, and that's indefinite. How long can we do that?
And they're talking QE4 now, too.
Yes. So ultimately the economy is going to collapse. I don't see how it could be avoided. Now, I think prior to Obama's reelection, he had a vested interest in maybe getting the economy to perk up a bit so he could say all of his BS programs are working. But now that he's been elected, I don't think he has an interest in growing the economy at all. I think it's the exact opposite. I think the man wants to collapse the economy so he can take over the country.
Mm-hmm.
I really believe that. And locally, here, as long as we continue to pursue the same policies, we're going to end up with the same stagnation and destruction. I dream of somebody being able to step up to the plate instead of that wimp of a governor we have, Matt Mead, who would actually tell the feds where to go and take the state back from what's happened to it, tell them to keep all their federal money, get out of our way, leave us alone. You're not going to tell us how we can pack our guns or any of the rest of it, how we're going to teach our children through Common Core, any of it. If we had some real leaders here on the local level that would stand up and take the state back, we could show the other states of the union how they too could progress and prosper. And then the federal government would have to go along because when push comes to shove, that's constitutional. When
Taylor Haynes was running for governor against Matt Mead, we never even knew who Taylor Haynes was until we started seeing signs. And then we, of course, went on the internet and we found out who he was. And then we changed who we're going to vote for to Taylor Haynes. You know, I like to have Taylor Haynes come on here too eventually. The thing that's coming,
Taylor's a great guy, and he is just the kind of man we need in the governor's office because he wouldn't put up with this unconstitutional BS. Mm-hmm. He would strip the federal government back down to its just and enumerated powers before you could blink it. And the thing I like about Taylor is he's got his ducks in a row. Everything that he would do shy of vouchers for schools, which he would need the legislators' help for, everything else he could do through the Constitution or through Supreme Court declarations. So he's done his homework, no doubt about it. He would be an excellent governor for the state of Wyoming.
I do like him a lot. You know, I had a conversation today with somebody just with guns and stuff like that. And I'm only bringing this up because of the mentality of people. But we were talking about, you know, they would like to eventually maybe take away our gun rights. And the person is in their 20s, they're former the Air Force Base. And they said, well, you know, how the president is, he's like the principal. If he says it, you better do it. Otherwise, you're going to get whacked. Well, who said that? What was that? Chris Rock said the same thing.
Yeah, and I used to like him. All right, he was pretty funny. But I didn't find that funny at all. Because, see, we're not children, all right? Nope. The beauty of the United States of America, and I'm going to go back to John Locke on this one, okay? Not a whole lot of people know who John Locke is. But John Locke was an English philosopher that lived in the late 1600s, and he wrote a landmark work that was called Two Treatises of Government. And in 1690, and he had to publish those anonymously because of the political climate at the time. And he basically said that the role of government was the protection of life, liberty, and property. And one of his students, not a real student that lived at the time, but one of his intellectual students, was Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence. And he framed it as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the ideas and the ideals of John Locke were the founding principles of the United States of America. The United States of America is the nation of the Enlightenment. For the first time in history, we had a revolution that was based not military force necessarily, but ideological force. And the idea of the rights of man toppled King George and his kingdom as far as it related to the United States, like it wasn't even there, like it was made of straw. And that's the power of an idea as opposed to a gun.
Mm-hmm.
And we need that same idea. We need another Thomas Paine to point out all the things that he pointed out in common sense. Because, see, the problem now is the dictators aren't on the other side of the ocean. They live with us.
Yes.
They're down the street from us. They're in high offices of power. They control the infrastructure of the United States. They control the infrastructure of Wyoming. They control the infrastructure of the city of Cheyenne. So we've got our work cut out for us. And quite frankly, I didn't say it to the council because I literally didn't want to be misinterpreted, but what I felt like telling them was, how far do you think you're going to push people before you trigger a revolution?
Yeah. And I was going to ask you that. How close do you think we're actually going to see that? I mean, I hear people talking about it everywhere.
Well, I think that I think that we're, in a lot of ways, we're in the same boat that we were in back in 1775, Barry. And let me just take a minute out to explain what I mean by that.
Sure.
If you look at the intellectual ideas that were floating around in 1774 and 1775, there were a number of people that were getting fed up and were talking revolution. But the majority of the country thought that we could reconcile with Britain and we could get things worked out if they just quit being so heavy-handed and allow us some representation that we could work things out.
Mm-hmm.
Then they attacked us at Lexington and Concord. And from that point on, the war was on. In January of 1776, even after Lexington and Concord, more than half the people in the country thought that we should reconcile with Britain. Then Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense, where he demonstrated all the reasons why we should be an independent nation. And I think one of the best analogies he used in that work was, you know, why would an island tell the continent what to do? All right? And, I mean, he demonstrated clearly and in prose that anybody could understand that we needed to be independent. And within 6 months, we were actually at war. We'd written the Declaration. Now, if you take a look at the intellectual climate today, the majority of the people do not subscribe even to the ideals that were common at the time of the Revolution. Mm-hmm. But there's a definite groundswell of a lot of people out there that do. And I think and I'm just throwing this out for you to think about, okay?
Sure.
The only thing that's really going to get us to revolt to the point where we will be moderately successful is if we're attacked by our own government.
You know, and the reason I brought that up is, it just seems like that's what's being set up, an attack.
And I think there's going to be a flashpoint that's going to come. I think the economy is going to go into the toilet big time, far worse than the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. And what that's going to trigger martial law, and martial law is going to trigger a lot of people to start fighting back. And what's going to happen is the government's going to move in and blow a lot of people away at some flashpoint somewhere, and then the war's on.
I was talking to somebody from Salt Lake City. I won't name his name, but he was telling me that a state worker from Utah had called a local radio station out there, and what he was saying was that, hey, they are preparing for us to cause little riots with the people, make them fed up, and we're just going to go in there and we're going to blow them away.
See what's going to happen, and you could see. I've seen it coming for 35 years, Barry.
Yeah.
In the long principled range view of it, but what I've specifically seen in the last few years is very disturbing. I've seen FEMA camps. I've seen the Department of Homeland Security buying up billions of rounds of hollow point ammunition. I've heard the president now declaring that one of the criteria for officer promotion in the armed forces is, will you shoot an American citizen?
Exactly. I've seen the same thing.
Okay, and so what this is telling me very clearly, and even as recently as 2 or 3 years ago, when Janet Napolitano, Big Sis, was saying, that a terrorist is a right-wing constitutionalist.
Yeah.
See, ideologically, they know where it's going to come from. They know what section of the population is going to finally say, we're done with you people, we're going to fight back. It's not going to be the left-wingers. It's not going to be the rioters that aren't getting their free lunch. It's going to be the people that understand the founding ideals of the United States of America that are going to do it, and that's the ones that we're the ones that are on their radar, and we're the ones they're worried about.
Well, I don't know if you know, do you know trends researcher Gerald Celente?
No.
Well, he basically said, when people lose everything, they lose it. One of the things that, when he was younger, his dad had told him, he said, why are you blabbing all this stuff? You keep repeating everybody. He says, start thinking for yourself. That's the problem we're having with America. We have people living the TV channels. They talk about TV, they do this and that, but they cannot think for themselves. And when you bring up these issues we're talking about now, they don't know how to actually comprehend it.
And you're absolutely right, Barry. And it gets back to the conversation you and I had personally between the two of us last week.
Yes.
They've taken over the educational system. See, in order to be able to think long range, in order to be able to relate concretes to abstracts, in order to be able to evaluate current events in the light of an idea, you have to have been educated on a conceptual level. And it's precisely the opposite which is happening in our school system these days, and it's been happening for decades. I believe I went to grade school in the 60s. I'm 53.
Uh-huh.
My generation was probably the last one where there was large-scale phonics in the school system, all right? What they replaced it with by the time the 70s had rolled around was look-say, and what it created was a reading neurosis that did not exist prior to the destruction of the phonics system of education. And you have destroyed people's ability to interrelate the millions and millions of pieces of information that float around in a complex industrial civilization. They literally have no ideas on which to hang that stuff on. They're lost. Yep. And so, you can tell them whatever you want. And it's like what we were talking about when Ben Carson mentioned to the president in his prayer breakfast a few weeks ago that it was illegal to teach a slave how to read.
Yes. Prior
to the Civil War. And the reason why was because a slave who could read knew things, and a slave who knew things was a dangerous person. Well, they've applied that whole idea of banning true education to our entire system of schools. And what we end up with, and there are exceptions, but they're exceptions in spite of, not because of, the indoctrination, what we end up with is an educational system that is geared toward telling you how to think instead of teaching you how to think.
Yeah, that's exactly. The sad part is when it's so hard because, Brad, myself, and your wife, Barbie, it's so hard for me to tell somebody what I see because so many that are younger now, I can't get on their level because it's like The Simpsons or something like that. I have no clue how to.
You don't have the 30-second reality soundbite that's going to grab their attention.
That's right.
And here's the thing, and I know Barbie wants to chime in here, but let me just say something on that note real quick. It has gotten to the point where there are so many false premises at work that in order to effectively challenge somebody's bad idea, you have to challenge all the preconceived notions that bad idea is based on. I had a discussion with a city council member just 2 days ago that believes that capitalism creates monopolies and that this is one of the reasons why we had the antitrust law and everything else. The idea that capitalism creates monopolies is straight out of Das Kapital by Karl Marx.
Uh-huh.
So if you want to have an intelligent conversation with somebody about economics, well, you got to challenge all the Marxian nonsense that's out there. You have to point out the true history of capitalism. The truth is pulling its boots on while the lie shoots its way around the world.
Yes.
So in order to be able to reach somebody, you first have to get the garbage out of their brains. But they're very resistant to that. I mean, that's what they learned at school.
Exactly.
So the people who decided, and I don't think that the majority, even the left-wingers, I don't think the majority of the teachers and administrators and principals out there did this consciously. But I do believe that the upper echelon of left-wing promulgation and propagation knew exactly what they were doing when they took over the educational system. Because once you have people's minds, you have them, period.
That's true. Very true. Barbie, what do you have to say?
Well, I think that the most important thing is to put it down on a level to where the moms and, the rest of us can understand it. People don't get interested until it's my yard, until it's, my 10 feet that you want to move. I can't put my new garage on, or I can't build this, or I can't do that. Then they get interested. But, we have tried for a year and a half to get this community to come together, and the South Side was a huge thing for me. Watching those people, and Brad and I got involved in it, and they succeeded and they won. The WTE said they were an angry mob. There's no such thing. They peacefully gathered information, and they stood together. But to me, the sad thing was, where was the city of Cheyenne? Because when the city of Cheyenne needs it, the South Side would be a good support, and there's no support. People who go to city council meetings or who have a voice at all, it's because you want 10 feet on Pershing of, my front yard, and we're going to figure out really who owns that 10 feet. But not even your neighbors there, only you are.
Let's back up for a second, Barry, because your listeners might not understand what Barbie's referring to.
Sure. That
Cheyenne MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization I was speaking of, being the genesis for the foundation of Agenda 21 policies here in the local area, actually put forth a South Greeley Highway redevelopment plan where they actually drew up plans that were totally destructive of everybody's property on the south side. They wanted feeder roads for South Greeley Highway, and they just put feeder roads right through people's trailers and their businesses. And Maury Brown, who owns the Town and Country complex on South Greeley Highway, spent thousands and thousands of dollars. He hired a lawyer, Pat Crank, who got involved with the South Cheyenne Community Development Association, and they held public meetings. And let me tell you, those public meetings were advertised, and hundreds of people showed up to them, and they were overwhelmingly opposed to these plans. And the county planner, Gary Krantz, showed up to a couple of them too, and he got an earful. And you know what? I'll give that man some credit. He went back to the Laramie County Commission, and he told them, you need to wipe this idea off your books. And that's exactly what they did. But see, that's what happens when people actually get an opportunity to do public input, not the farce of the appearance of public input that passes for it when the Cheyenne MPO or the City Council or the Planning Commission was allowed to have their way. And so that's what Barbie's referring to. But what she's talking about in general, too, I think, and Barbie, correct me if I'm wrong, is what you're saying is because people are so short-range in their mentalities, and not because they're stupid, but because they haven't been educated properly, they don't start hollering until it's right there on their front yard, all right? Well, by then it's too late.
Yeah.
When it's on your front doorstep, you're standing alone because the neighbor doesn't want to get involved, and it's not because of the principle. It's fear. They don't want retribution from the community, maybe whether it's law enforcement, it doesn't matter who it is. They're afraid. They want to be left alone. That's a sad way to live.
Well, and that's what... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to add to that and say the hardest thing for me is the publisher of the Torch, when I was looking for stories that I knew would be of community interest in terms of how heavy-handed the city was in its business practices with local area businesses that were trying to develop and create jobs and pay for their dinner tables and everything. The biggest thing I ran into was that nobody wanted to be quoted directly because they were afraid, especially the contractors. The contractors and developers with very few exceptions. The biggest one being Frank Cole, but he's got so much money that, you know, he could basically tell the city council to jump off a cliff, and there ain't a whole lot they can do about it. But the little guys, not that they were little, but everything that they did had to be approved. And they were afraid that if they spoke up and said, hey, this is nonsense, that they were going to suffer economically, that they weren't going to be able to feed their families anymore.
I think, you know, something for people that really understand is with Brad and I, they kind of got Brad and I together and said, you know, you guys go do this, and you go fight this battle, and here, let me tell you what's going on in city council and the corruption, and let me tell you about this corruption over here. And so Brad would do the research. Yeah, we would find the corruption, but you couldn't calculate it because you couldn't give anybody's name. Nobody would stand behind you. So, you know, they're pushing you and they're saying, here, you guys go fix this, and here, you guys, you know, research this. And you spend hours and hours and hours doing it. And you want to bring it forth and do something good with it to turn things around and to show people, you know, they can still have a free land. And those people are all like, oh, don't mention me. You know, you look behind you, and you're the only one standing there. And at that point, it's your life that's being threatened.
And I'll give you a good example of how frustrating that was to me, Barry. Back when Barb and I lived in Oregon, we had a business, Liberty Computer Service, and this freak came in our door one day, and he was spun out on drugs or something, and he wasn't being violent, but he was running around and everything, and I threw him out, and he was running around accosting people in the parking lot, and Barb and I went out to take care of him and just to remove him. And there was some guy sitting in a car that was right in front of our door, and Barbie knocked on his window, and he rolled down his window and says, can you help us handle this guy, please? And he says, lady, I got a baby in the car. And Barbie looked at him and said, and what kind of world do you want him to grow up in?
Mm.
And see, that's what I would say to those gutless cowards that are too afraid to stand up. I understand the fear, but you know what? Have you ever heard the old saying that if it's time to bury your guns, it's time to dig them up?
Yeah.
And I would say if things have gotten to the point where you are so afraid of retribution, now is the time to stand up. You know what? If you don't stand up now, you might never get a chance to stand up again. It has gotten to the point where we are literally in danger of collapsing the American Republic.
I agree.
If we don't stand up, then it's going to collapse.
And you know
I don't know how to put it.
I agree. And I think people are beginning. I think the thing that's really kind of waking people up is the gun issue. Some are still kind of denying it, but I think when they really try pushing hard for the guns, I think a lot of people are going to wake up.
Well, I certainly hope so, Barry, because we are in danger of being taken over. And if you look at what actually happens in societies in history that have been taken over, there's a few that resist, but by and large, the majority of the population goes along. It happened in Nazi Germany in 1930. It happened in Soviet Union in 1917. It happened in China in 1948. And what you end up with, you see, I don't think people realize just how much those dictatorships depend on the voluntary consent of their citizens. And this is something that I would throw out for your listeners to think about, that we have an incredible power, not only as individuals to refuse to produce and sanction the system, whether it be through voting or, production or what have you, but also as a united force. Let me give you an example. Look what Lech Walesa did to communist Poland in 1989. I mean, he leveled that government through solidarity, and they just threw down their tools and said, you know what, we're not working anymore. Look what Gandhi did to the British rule in India without ever firing a shot. He says, you know what, you're not going to tax ourselves anymore. We'll walk to the sea and get our own. And the government was killing those people by the dozens, and they just kept marching. If you get to the point where you realize that you have nothing to lose, nobody can control you anymore. You can't enslave a free man. All you can do is kill him.
That's very true. And I'm a loss for words when I see people every day. It wasn't until maybe 7 years ago I probably started seeing things, and I'm gradually waking up more and more. The thing is when you leave those people behind, it's so hard to pull them through all this muck. You've gone through it, and it's like, come on, guys, and it's almost like they almost act like it's not worth it.
And and that was one of the things that were very frustrating. And I know that we're probably over our time, but let me just take a couple minutes out to explain why we decided to fold the torch. The first reason, not the primary reason, but the first reason was a huge, incredible lack of time. Both Barbie and I were working 40 and 50-hour-a-week jobs, and we were working 40 or 50 hours a week on the paper, and we did that for 15 months. I literally poured every ounce of soul and energy and blood, sweat, and tears into that paper, Barry. I made it the best that I could, and I made mistakes, but every issue I thought was better than the last, but it chewed up a tremendous amount of time. So that was one of the reasons. We literally wanted to be able to live our lives and not just wave at one another in passing. The second reason was the amount of ridicule that we had to suffer through. I mean, we had death threats. There in the last 2 or 3 months when I really started going after the Agenda 21 UDC correlations, I mean, Barbie would walk down Capitol Avenue and have somebody throw 10 rocks at her, okay?
Really?
And the abuse that we got through the WTE comments and all the rest of it. And there were a large number of people that supported us and believed in what we were doing, but we definitely became the lightning rod and labeled as, alien invasion advocates, tinfoil hats. I mean, you name it. We got it all. That was the second reason. But I tell you what the third and final reason was. It was the election of 2012. When Barack Obama got reelected and the Senate maintained its Democratic majority, I told Barbie, we're done. There's nothing that we are going to be able to do from this point forward that's going to prevent a collapse. So let's quit trying to fight it. Let's prepare ourselves as best as we can for what we know is coming and try to influence what comes after. I don't believe that the American Republic is going to make it in its current form, in its current state. I call it the crash, and I decided to quit writing newspapers and start writing books instead, and the title of the book I'm in the middle of right now is called The Second Renaissance, and it's a story about how the United States of America is recreated about 50 years after the crash in 2014. And you know what? We completely lost any interest in social and political action whatsoever. And when you rolled all three of those reasons up, our newspaper was out one day and it wasn't the next. Our website was up one day and we trashed it the next. I killed my Facebook. I killed my blog. I killed it all because I decided that, A, I was fed up with trying to educate people that don't have any interest in education, for one, and that when I did try to educate them, ridiculed me for another. I got tired of the threats. I got tired of not having time to live my life. But more importantly, I got tired of trying to fight a Mack truck coming down at me at 80 miles an hour, 10 feet away, that I cannot dodge. Sure. And so I just asked myself, why am I putting all this energy? What can I better do with my energy? And what I came up with was passive civil disobedience. You know what? I don't sanction the system anymore. I don't vote because I think voting is an absolute waste of time, and we're outnumbered anyway. Mm-hmm. I keep my subsidies to the looters and moochers to the absolute minimum that I can. I just don't sanction the system anymore. And if 1/10 of 1% of the people in this country took that same attitude and approach, we would level the looters and moochers without a fight. They need us to survive, because looting and mooching by definition are predatory behaviors. They need a producer in order to mooch or loot from. If the producers decide to quit, a la John Galt and Atlas Shrugged, and say, you know what, I'm done producing, what are the moochers and looters going to do?
Yeah.
They have no means of sustenance any longer. So here we are, the producers, who have always been the ones that are really in control, and we're letting ourselves be controlled by ideological idiots. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. Well, it's our own voluntary consent that does it. It's the voluntary consent of the people that have been enslaved by the commissars in Red China and North Korea that actually allow those. That's why those regimes spent billions and billions of dollars on propaganda. Why would the Soviet Union spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on propaganda over a 75-year period? They're the dictators. They own everybody. It's because they really don't. And if those people became even slightly aware of the tremendous amount of power they have socially and intellectually, those people and those regimes would collapse.
Wow.
And so, quite frankly, what I'm about is I'm about crashing the system. It's the only way we're going to flush the looters and moochers.
Sure.
I believe the country needs to crash. How can we get rid of $16 trillion in debt, Barry? How can we get rid of $130 trillion in unfunded liabilities? It's impossible.
Oh, I agree. I do agree.
And if you look at, like, the Great Depression, for instance, which was prolonged by FDR and his socialistic policies, a depression historically lasts 6 months to a year. And a depression is a correction for the economic stupidity that preceded the depression. And we've got a depression coming that is far, far worse and far, far deeper than anything even remotely resembling the Great Depression. The Great Depression, compared to what's coming for us, is going to be like a firecracker to an atom bomb. There's no avoiding it. And it's actually needed to correct all the errors that we've been engaging in for 100 years. So after a while, you just throw up your hands and say, you know what, I'm done trying to fight it.
Mm-hmm. I do understand that.
I think Barbie's got something that she wants to say on that. She's got crinkled eyebrows. Get over here.
Well, I think that for everybody to know that both of us, we're going to be there for when it does happen, and to educate our children, our grandchildren, and those who are interested in being educated. And, you know, not in a group of people that, you know, where you're, I guess, pokes on us. Wearing a tin hat, you know, as a whole doesn't really bother me, if that's what they want to say. But I feel sorry for them because I'm not sure who's going to be there for them when it all does crash. Mm. So I think it's really important for a lot of people to start to get prepared so that they can help when that crash does happen.
And I would accentuate that a little bit. First off, let me state that if you look at what happened with Katrina, what you saw with Katrina, you know, everybody likes to blame Bush for that. Excuse me, New Orleans was controlled by Democrats during the Katrina hurricane, all right? All the stuff that happened, all the school buses that were sitting there flooded that were available to take people. I mean, all that horrendous stuff that happened in New Orleans and Katrina was because of democratic social and economic policies, okay? And yet the Republicans somehow took the hit for that. But here's my point. What you saw with Katrina was thousands of people died because the government could no longer provide essential services like medicine and water and food. All right, and look at what happened with Sandy on the East Coast. There were people in New York City dumpster diving in dumpsters just to feed themselves. Does anybody realize that New York City's got about 3 days' worth of food, and after that, it's gone? What happens if the power disappears in New York City completely like it did just in a small fraction, okay? And I'm not just talking about civil unrest or revolution or the collapse of society. I'm just talking about an earthquake or a tornado or a hurricane. Anybody that doesn't have at least a couple months of food and water stored is stupid or ignorant. All right, so those people are going to have a big problem when things start happening. But on a deeper level, what Barbie's talking about is, you know, our daughter's about ready to have a baby. He's going to be homeschooled. That's the way Katie wants to do it. And I've got my library, and he's going to grow up the same way I did with books around him and knowledge, and he's going to understand from the time he can walk and talk the founding principles of this country. I wish I could wave a wand and have that happen to just 0.1% of 1% of the kids in our public school system today. Because that's all it would take.
It's just sad because, like you said, the elite right now are really controlling that. I had somebody on last time here talking about, you know, all these different things that are coming down, and I feel like when I warn people, a lot of times they just don't listen. Do you guys feel the same way?
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, I feel sometimes like I'm just pounding my head against the wall, and after a while, you got to ask yourself, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And I know that by abandoning that approach, I've left a few good people out there a little bereft, and that I struggled with that quite a bit. But the more and more I realized that the solution for me on a personal level was disengagement, and that if other people also got that same idea, just like they did it with Gandhi in India. Gandhi, his major strength wasn't just his ideas, but the fact that he could take the individual minds of millions of Indians and align them so that it was like iron filings on a piece of paper with a magnet. Everything was coherent, pointing in the same direction. Let me give you an example. When you take a flashlight and shine its beam off into the distance, it dissipates after a few hundred feet.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take that same energy and focus it and make all the light waves parallel, which is what you do with a laser beam, that same energy can punch through steel. It's not the energy, it's the focus. That's where the power is.
Yes.
It's the focus. And so for me, even though on a personal level I'm disengaging, I have just aligned myself with maybe a few other people like me in the country that feel and think the same way. But every time another person comes into that arena and aligns themselves, not to lose their I in a group, not to become a we, but to join a collection of I's because we share the same values and principles and ideas and goals, that beam becomes that much stronger. And all we need is a few hundred, a few thousand, a few million more, and we're unstoppable.
I hope that we can get people woken up.
Well, I do too, Barry, and that was why when you asked if we wanted to come onto your show that we said yes, because a week earlier I told Barbie I don't ever want to write another newspaper story or be on a radio show again. I'm done.
Yeah.
You know, but there's still that part of me that understands that even though I'm disengaging, that I'm not dropping out of society. There's still those people out there that need to evolve in their own consciousness to come to the point where they see the answers, because you can't shove the answer down anybody's throat. It has to be adopted voluntarily.
You know, they have to feel it. And I think that living in fear, it's just no way. I mean, if you believe that economically, if you believe that on a personal level that all these people are out to destroy you, see, they already have. You're not living a free life. You're not doing what you want. You're living in fear all the time. And, you know, to teach people, quit living in fear. And if you join together, there's strength. And it's really a hard lesson to teach somebody until they're the one who is actually being threatened. And even then, they're scared. So, you know, to me, if to teach somebody anything, it would be to get rid of the fear. You know, the fear is controlling all of them.
Well, it was
Go ahead, Barry. I'm sorry.
Oh, you know, I was once heard that it says once you become determined, fear has to leave.
Yeah, and you know, fear too. It's not overcoming fear. It doesn't mean that you don't have fear. It means that you don't let it stop you from what you know you need to do. And that's what courage and bravery is. It doesn't mean you're fearless. It means that you looked at your fear and said, you know what, I see you there, but I need to do this because I need to look at myself in the mirror tomorrow morning.
The responsibility and the accountability that comes along with that. You've made a decision that even though the fears may have some reality to them, that you're okay with that, and you're going to bear those consequences if that, you know, should come about, and be okay with it.
And the fear that we're controlled by. I mean, look at what the president is doing. He's letting illegal aliens out of jail. He is, you know, hollering that the whole government's going to grind to a... He's fear-mongering.
Yep.
He is cashing in on people's uncertainties and appealing to their ignorance and their fear, and that's not how you run a successful country. This guy is the most divisive president I've ever seen. And it's not. He's not just divisive because he wants to get something done. It's not that he wants to get something done that's the problem. It's what he wants to get done that's the problem.
Yeah.
You know.
That's why you see this all over the United States right now. You've got people that are snapping. But I think the one thing that's interesting about some of the things that are going on with people snapping is that the consequences are being aimed directly at the people not just in people in general. It's not like in L.A. when they were doing drive-by shootings and just shooting anybody. They're going back at who they're angry at, you know, and that's a scary thought. So he needs to, I really believe the president needs to be careful about what he's doing with this fear, because I believe it's going to backfire at some point.
I agree. I do agree. I'm hearing that a lot from people.
and you know, the people snapping, all just about all human behavior would fit a bell curve. I mean, there's certain stimuli that affect some people some way and other people another way. But, I mean, I think everybody would agree that you can only back people up against the wall so far before they start pushing back. You know, somebody that's a little more hot-headed might push back sooner. Somebody that is fearful of confrontation might wait till they've actually got a gun pointing in their face, okay? But the bulk of people, there's going to be that bell at the curve. And if you look at what's going on around this, and now part of it is that the news media trumpets a lot of it more than they did 30 years ago, but I can tell you that, in my opinion, we're seeing a lot more horrendous stuff happening now than we did 30 or 40 years ago. And the reason why is because I believe back in people's minds, they understand, even if they don't understand it intellectually, they feel it emotionally. They realize that things are out of control, that there's no more rationality out there anymore, that nothing makes any sense, that we're in the hands of some huge, tremendous force that we have so stupidly let loose in the world, and that there's no hope. Mm-hmm. So they start drinking, they start drugging, they start shooting, and what you get is, you know, Sandy Hook, or you get, you know, what happened with that cop in Los Angeles that was mad because, see, I think that guy's a total loon, but I believe what he said about the LAPD. I lived in Los Angeles for 20 years. I saw a lot of that stuff with my own eyes. I believe what he was described in his manifesto as the policies of the Los Angeles Police Department. Yeah. But my point is that as this chaos increases, as this uncertainty and lack of hope grows in people, they you know, a guy will freak out and kill his family, shoot his wife and kids for crying out loud, Barry, and then blow his own brains out. Why? Probably because he don't think life's worth living anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. When people start losing everything, they lose it.
Look at the suicide rate with the kids. I mean, here in Cheyenne in the last 2 years, we've had 12 people snuff their own lives out. And some of them were very bright stars, cheerleaders, successful people at school. And Barb didn't understand that at first. And I told her, Barb, it's the people that succeed that are getting hurt the worst. It's the people that have value that are being taken down. That's why it's the best and the brightest that are snuffing their lives, and not just some degenerate in a gutter somewhere, because they're the ones that are being attacked. This is culturally, Barry, I believe that this is a war on everything that life is about. Not just politics, not just economics. This is a war on human life. Mm-hmm. I believe that.
Yeah. You know, I was really glad that you guys really said what you had to say tonight. And I want to have you guys come on again because I know that the internet is eventually going to come down. I believe that we're going to see it. And I believe that people here in Cheyenne, and I'm also asking people that listen to it in other parts of the United States, wherever you're at, that you'll start linking up with people that are determined because, you know, if you're not sure what to do, you'll be linked up with the right people if you're looking for them. You know, Brad and Barbie, I'm really glad that you came on tonight. Is there any final things you want to say?
Barry, I would just like to say that, you know, nothing is insurmountable, and there's never no hope. As long as you breathe it, there's still a chance. And if a few more people begin to wake up and realize what's going on around us, we can actually change this. I don't believe that this is predetermined. I don't think that we have to sink into the sewer and be just another ash heap on history. I believe we've got a crash coming, all right? But I don't believe that that's going to destroy us. I believe that we can rise like a phoenix out of the ashes from that and correct the problems that led to it and reassert the founding philosophy of the United States of America consistently this time and bring forth another civilization that doesn't make the mistakes that our previous civilization did. And I would just, if I had one message to your listeners out there, don't believe a word that you hear from the government. Start learning some history. Understand the ideas of the Founding Fathers and realize that you are in control of your mind and that if you choose to give that control up, that's your choice. No form of exploitation can continue for long without the consent of the exploited.
Yes.
What about you, Barb?
I would think that it would be that dreams are achievable. You know, as long as you're not compromising, you're living still a happy life. And when you're happy and you're clear-minded, your freedom is all that you think about, because it allows the success of your dreams. You can't have successive dreams and live in fear.
Mm-hmm.
So I would think that, that they would continue with their dreams. They are achievable.